If you've been keeping an eye on world affairs, then you will have noticed that there has been a recent disturbing trend. You could say a global phenomena. And that is the return to the position that one needs to put one's own interest first over the interests of others. This was the disastrous policy followed by Nazi Germany that has in fact been the status quo since time immemorial. And what has been the result of this way of thinking? Well, that is a continuous succession of hegemonistic dynasties fighting for supremacy that has led to so much strife and trouble in the world. This pre-industrial, zero-sum game mentality that believes there are only winners or losers, and there is no such thing as a win-win scenario. Who are the principal losers in such an environment? And sadly, that is the ordinary people, the working class, those engaged in agricultural activity, the peasant class. And just because this way of thinking is endemic in the world doesn't mean that we have to accept it, nor that there is nothing we can do about it. The consequences of this way of thinking are severe, but also it points to a more fundamental and underlying issue that confronts us on the spiritual path, and that is our inherent self-cherishing. And so, at this point, it would be helpful if I could give you a few real-life examples of our tendency towards self-centeredness, what we call the anthropocentric view. Since beginningless time, as soon as we were able to look up into the night sky and question our existence in the universe, we had this fundamental belief that the earth beneath our feet was the ground of everything in the universe. We believed that everything in the universe revolved around our own planet, and that the earth itself was the center of the universe. And it took many centuries for us to debunk this fundamental view. And it was only around the 3rd century BC when people first began to question this notion of the earth being the center of the universe. It was only around the 16th century when Nicholas Copernicus composed the first fully developed heliocentric model of our solar system. Even when this heliocentric model of our solar system was generally accepted by the scientific community, we still continued to believe that our solar system was the center of the universe. And so you can see here there's this tendency to believe that our self-centered perspective represents the ultimate truth. Of course, more recently, what we've discovered is our solar system is not only not the center of the universe, but holds a rather insignificant position on the edge of our own galaxy, which itself is not the center of the universe. However, even though science has proven that we are not at the center of the universe, we still cling on to this idea that somehow we are special. For example, Elon Musk believes that we need to become a multi-planetary species, and the reason for this is to preserve consciousness in the universe. What we can see here is that his belief is founded on the notion that we represent consciousness in the universe. For example, that we are the only intelligent or self-aware life in the universe. And someone who believed that self-aware consciousness was quite common in the universe would not hold this position. In general, I think only about half the people in the world believe that there is intelligent life beyond the planet Earth, which is quite surprising to me. To my mind, the existence of life on this planet indicates that consciousness must be quite common in the universe. I think most people are quite comfortable with the idea of intelligent alien life, but they want to see some evidence of the fact before they actually believe it. And I think this tendency is based on this fundamental notion that there is something special about us and our position in the universe. And you might ask, what has this got to do with the spiritual path? The important point here is that this self-centered perspective is fundamental to what we call sentient life. And in terms of the Buddhist teachings, it is also the source of all our suffering and problems. And so on the Mahayana path, what is taught is, in order to overcome suffering, one must first overcome one's self-cherishing. The process in Tibetan Buddhism is what is called the 7 points of mind training. It's a methodology that uses our natural love and compassion to those near and dear to us and cultivates that outwards to all sentient beings, including our enemies, and is also taught to be the supreme cause for final awakening. The idea is, as long as we are gripped by our self-cherishing, we will continue to suffer in the mundane world. And so this process is one of first reducing self-cherishing and then eventually eliminating it. It's something called the realization of no self. However, this realization of no self is not merely an intellectual argument to convince you that there is no such thing as the ego. The realization of no self is a direct recognition of the truth of the lack of the identity of the individual and also the lack of identity of phenomena. It is taught that although external phenomena appear to exist, they have no substantial essence. In fact, they are ephemeral and represent a continual flux of change. This fundamental Mahayana Buddhist belief is actually very compatible with modern quantum physics, that posits phenomena itself is in what is called an uncertain state. The very particles that make up our body and the universe themselves do not exist in any fixed way. For example, an electron can have a left spin, a right spin, and both a left and a right spin at the same time. You see, it never has some fixed identity. Naturally, modern physicists, who are for the most part ordinary beings and not sublime beings, still cling to the substantial reality of external phenomena. And because of this prejudice, then they look for a system by which quantum reality can resolve itself into our classically observed reality, which seems to be fixed in some way. If you apply Buddhist thinking and logic, then you will come to understand that there is no object that can be quantified. If you are familiar with this Buddhist process of analyzing apparently real external phenomena, then you will no doubt have some experience on how that which at first seems to be substantially real loses its identity through the process of investigation. This self, or soul, as it is sometimes referred to, that we initially cling to as being something substantially real, under investigation slowly loses its identity. Once we come to realize that this self that we initially take to be something substantial and real is in fact a mere imputation, something labeled upon this psychosomatic agglomeration of mental events and physical form that we call the body, with that we achieve liberation from suffering in the mundane world. And it is my sincere wish that you should also come to realize this state of freedom and awakening, that is no longer troubled by self-identification and clinging to notions of me and mine. And in order to do that, first you have to identify this strong and fundamental tendency to cling to the self as being the most important thing in the universe. And if you understand this point, you will also come to understand how very dangerous this current trend is, that is returning to taking one's own self-concern as being more important than the concerns of others. In fact, you will come to understand that this is actually the source of all your suffering. It is a generally accepted fact that the more clinging we have, the more suffering we will experience. And there is no more dangerous form of clinging than self-cherishing. So do whatever you can to reduce your self-concern. And don't think about putting yourself above others. And if you are in any doubt of this fact, then all you need to do is look back through our own history. Look to see what the past consequences were of this policy of putting one's own interests over the interests of others was. Look back over our own European history, over the generations, decades, and centuries of warfare and conflict that came about from individuals, families, races, nations, all fighting for supremacy on the world stage. The truth is, we are all in this together. We only have one planet to live on, and we are only one planet amongst trillions within the universe. And throughout those trillions of world systems, there are infinite other conscious beings who are all trapped like us within the 6 realms of samsara. Well, that's about all I had to say this evening about the current state of affair in world politics and our potential for the spiritual path. My only hope is that you'll be able to find your own practice and apply yourself to that and eventually achieve liberation from suffering, and in the end, the state of total omniscience, that which we call Buddhahood, that is gained only for the sake of other sentient beings. Until next time, then see you later.